The small-town courthouse buzzed with quiet murmurs as people filled the benches, curious about the unusual case scheduled for the day. At the center of it all sat a 16-year-old girl named Lily Harper. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the stack of papers in front of her. She wore a simple dress borrowed from her mother, and her long brown hair was tied back in a loose ponytail. Despite her nervous appearance, there was something determined in her eyes, something that hinted at courage far beyond her years. Lily wasn't just any teenager. Today she was the defendant in a courtroom trial. But what made this scene so extraordinary was that she had no lawyer by her side. Instead, she had chosen to represent herself, a decision born out of necessity rather than confidence. Her family lived paycheck to paycheck, struggling to make ends meet, and hiring an attorney was simply not an option. When the state offered her one for free, her father refused, insisting they wouldn't accept handouts. So here she was, armed only with handwritten notes and a heart full of conviction. The room fell silent as Judge Richard Calloway entered, his robes flowing behind him like a dark cloud. Known throughout the county for his strict demeanor and sharp tongue, he commanded respect or fear from everyone who stepped foot in his courtroom. His stern gaze swept over the attendees before settling on Lily. For a moment he studied her, his expression unreadable. Then, without missing a beat, he called the court to order. "Miss Harper," he began, his voice echoing through the chamber, "you understand that you are facing criminal charges, correct?" Lily nodded quickly, clutching her pen tightly. "And yet," he continued, raising an eyebrow, "you've decided to act as your own counsel. Do you even grasp the gravity of this situation?" Lily swallowed hard but managed to respond, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." Judge Calloway leaned back in his chair, clearly unimpressed. "Let me be clear," he said, his tone dripping with skepticism. "This isn't some school debate club. You're standing in a court of law, charged with breaking the law. Are you prepared to handle that responsibility?" The question hung heavy in the air, and for a brief moment, Lily felt doubt creep in. Could she really do this? Was she making a huge mistake? But then she remembered why she was here, not for herself, but for someone else entirely. This wasn't about pride or proving a point. It was about doing what was right. And with that thought, her resolve hardened. "I'll do my best, Your Honor," she replied firmly, meeting his gaze. The judge stared at her for a second longer before nodding curtly. He turned his attention to the prosecutor, signaling for the proceedings to begin. As the formalities unfolded, Lily took a deep breath, reminding herself of the events that had led her here. She knew the odds were stacked against her, but she also knew she couldn't give up. Not now, not when so much was at stake. Little did anyone in the courtroom realize, including Judge Calloway, that this seemingly ordinary teenager was about to deliver a defense that would leave them speechless. Judge Richard Calloway was not a man known for his patience, and it didn't take long for his irritation to show. As Lily began presenting her case, stumbling slightly over her words in the intimidating setting, the judge's expression grew more and more sour. He leaned forward in his chair, his sharp eyes narrowing as he interrupted her mid-sentence. "Young lady," he said, his voice cutting through the room like a knife, "do you even know what burden of proof means? Or are you just winging this whole thing?" The gallery fell silent, all eyes turning to Lily, who froze momentarily. Her cheeks flushed red, but she quickly regained her composure, clutching her notes tighter. I've done my research, Your Honor," she stammered, trying to sound confident despite the lump forming in her throat. "I believe—" "Research?" Judge Calloway scoffed, raising his hand to silence her. "Let me tell you something, Miss Harper. Watching courtroom dramas on television doesn't qualify as research. This isn't a game. People's lives and reputations are at stake here." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some exchanging glances while others whispered behind cupped hands. A few chuckled nervously at the judge's biting remarks, though most felt a pang of sympathy for the young girl standing alone against such authority. Even the prosecutor, seated confidently at his table, couldn't help but smirk at the awkward scene unfolding before him. Lily, however, refused to let the judge's harsh words break her spirit. She took a deep breath, reminding herself why she was there. She wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for justice, for the injured dog that had been abandoned and left to suffer. With renewed determination, she squared her shoulders and looked directly at the judge. "I understand this is serious, Your Honor," she said, her voice steadier now. "But so is leaving an animal to die when you have the chance to save it." Her bold response caught Judge Calloway off guard, though he quickly masked his surprise with another scowl. "Save it," he repeated, his tone laced with sarcasm. "You broke the law, Miss Harper. Laws exist for a reason, to maintain order. What part of no trespassing did you fail to comprehend?" The gallery murmured again, some nodding, in agreement with the judge, while others seemed unsettled by his relentless attack on the teenager. One elderly woman in the front row frowned deeply, shaking her head disapprovingly. Even the bailiff standing near the door appeared uneasy, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Lily hesitated for a moment, unsure how to respond without provoking the judge further. But then she remembered something her teacher once told her. Sometimes the best way to win an argument is to stay calm and stick to the facts. Taking another steadying breath, she spoke again. "Your Honor," she began, choosing her words carefully, "I didn't ignore the sign because I wanted to break the rules. I climbed that fence because I heard a dog crying for help. It was hurt, scared, and alone. If I hadn't acted, it might not have survived." Her sincerity was evident, and for a brief second, there was a flicker of softness in Judge Calloway's eyes. But just as quickly it vanished, replaced by his usual sternness. "Emotions don't excuse illegal actions," he snapped. "If everyone followed their feelings instead of the law, we'd have chaos." The tension in the room thickened as the judge's words hung in the air. Lily felt a wave of frustration wash over her, but she forced herself to remain composed. She glanced down at her notes, searching for a way to counter his argument. Deep down, she knew she couldn't match the judge's experience or legal knowledge, but she also knew she had something he didn't. A story worth telling. As the judge leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, Lily realized this was her moment, to shift the narrative. She couldn't let him reduce her actions to mere defiance. This wasn't about breaking rules. It was about doing what was right, even when it was hard. And she was determined to make sure the court understood that, no matter how much ridicule came her way. Lily's voice steadied as she began recounting the events that had brought her to this courtroom. She spoke slowly, carefully choosing each word, knowing that this was her chance to paint a picture for everyone present, to make them see what she had seen and feel what she had felt. "It was an ordinary afternoon," she started, glancing briefly at the judge before continuing. "I was walking home from school, taking my usual route through the quieter part of town. The streets were empty and everything seemed normal until I heard it, a faint whimpering sound coming from behind a tall fence." She paused, letting the image form in the minds of those listening. "At first I thought maybe it was a stray cat or something small caught in the bushes. But the cries grew louder, more desperate, and I realized they were coming from inside the property." The gallery leaned forward slightly, their attention fully on Lily now. Even Judge Calloway, who had been scribbling notes with visible impatience, stopped writing and looked up, his expression unreadable but curious. "The gate had a big, 'No trespassing' sign on it," Lily continued, gesturing with her hands, as if reliving the moment. "But I couldn't just walk away. Something about those sounds, it pulled at me. So, I peeked through the cracks in the fence and saw a dog, a German shepherd lying on the ground, tangled in some old wires and debris. It looked so scared, so hurt." Her voice softened, trembling slightly as she described the scene. "Its fur was matted and there was blood on its leg. It tried to stand when it noticed me, but it couldn't. All it could do was whimper." She took a deep breath, composing herself before going on. "I called out to see if anyone was around, but no one answered. I checked my phone for signal. Nothing. No bars, no way to call for help. And even if I'd gone looking for someone, who knows how long that would have taken? Every second mattered. That dog was suffering right in front of me." Lily paused again, letting the gravity of her words sink in. She locked eyes with the judge, her gaze unwavering. Your Honor, I didn't climb that fence because I wanted to break the rules. I did it because I didn't have a choice. If I'd waited any longer, that dog might not have made it. Her story struck a chord with the audience. Some nodded sympathetically while others exchanged glances, clearly moved by her account. One woman in the back dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while a man sitting nearby muttered under his breath, "Poor thing." Judge Calloway, however, remained stoic. He tapped his pen against the desk, his face betraying little emotion. "So, you admit you entered private property without permission?" he asked sharply, cutting through the emotional undertones of Lily's narrative. "Yes, Your Honor," Lily replied without hesitation. "But I want you to understand why. That dog wasn't just abandoned, it was left to die. Someone put up that fence and ignored what was happening inside. How can we say it's wrong to save a life when doing nothing is far worse?" The room fell silent, the weight of her question hanging in the air. For a moment it felt as though time itself had paused. Even the prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, flipping through his papers as if searching for a counter-argument. Lily pressed on, sensing she had captured the court's attention. When animal control finally arrived later, they told me the dog was severely dehydrated and malnourished. Its injuries were serious, but it survived thanks to immediate care. They said if I hadn't acted... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The implication hung heavy in the room. For the first time since the trial began, Judge Calloway seemed conflicted. His brow furrowed slightly, and he glanced down at the case file in front of him. Though he quickly masked his reaction, it was clear that Lily's words had planted a seed of doubt, a tiny crack in the rigid wall of legal procedure. As Lily sat down, her heart pounding, she knew she had done all she could to share her truth. Now it was up to the court to decide whether compassion outweighed the letter of the law. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with slicked-back hair and a neatly pressed suit, stood up from his seat, adjusting his tie as he approached the podium. His demeanor was calm but calculated, exuding the confidence of someone who had spent years mastering the art of persuasion. He glanced at Lily briefly before turning his attention to the judge, his tone professional yet firm. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and deliberate. "While we can all agree that the condition of the animal in question is unfortunate, it does not justify the defendant's blatant disregard for the law." He paused for effect, letting his words sink in. "Miss Harper willingly chose to trespass on private property without permission. This is not a gray area. It's a clear violation of established legal boundaries." He turned slightly toward the gallery, making eye contact with a few members of the audience as if to emphasize the seriousness of the matter. Laws are put in place to protect both individuals and society as a whole. If every citizen felt entitled to act based on their personal feelings or circumstances, where would we draw the line? Would it be acceptable to break into someone's home because you suspect they're hiding something illegal? Or drive through a red light because you're in a hurry? The gallery murmured in agreement, some nodding along as the prosecutor painted a picture of chaos resulting from unchecked individual judgment. Judge Calloway leaned back in his chair, visibly approving of the argument being presented. He gave a small nod, signaling the prosecutor to continue. "Furthermore," the prosecutor added, pointing a finger toward Lily for emphasis, "Miss Harper had options. She could have sought help from local authorities instead of taking matters into her own hands. There are proper channels for addressing concerns like this, channels designed to ensure safety and accountability. By ignoring them, she not only broke the law but also set a dangerous precedent." Lily listened intently, her jaw tightening as each accusation hit its mark. She wanted to argue, to explain that waiting wasn't an option when every second counted. But she knew interrupting would only make things worse. Instead, she scribbled notes furiously on her legal pad, jotting down key phrases and questions to address later. The prosecutor stepped closer to the bench, lowering his voice slightly as if sharing a secret. "Let's not forget, Your Honor, that private property rights are fundamental to our legal system. Allowing such actions to go unpunished undermines the very foundation of order and respect for ownership. What message does this send to others? That laws can be bent or broken whenever emotions run high? Judge Calloway nodded again, his expression hardening. "A fair point, Mr. Prosecutor," he said aloud, casting a sidelong glance at Lily. "Emotions do not absolve one of responsibility." Lily felt a surge of frustration building inside her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She reminded herself that this was part of the process, that she'd get her chance to respond. Still, the prosecutor's words stung. He made her actions sound reckless, selfish even, as though she hadn't thought through the consequences. But what he failed to understand, and what she planned to highlight, was that sometimes there was no time to think, no luxury of waiting for protocol. When the prosecutor finally returned to his seat, satisfied with his performance, Lily took a deep breath. She flipped through her notes, underlining a few points she wanted to focus on during her rebuttal. Her mind raced as she pieced together her response, determined to shift the narrative back to the heart of the matter. Compassion over procedure, action over hesitation. As the room settled into silence, waiting for the next phase of the trial, Lily realized something important. The prosecutor's arguments, while polished and persuasive, lacked one crucial element. They didn't account for the humanity behind her decision. And that, she decided, was exactly where she would strike back. When it was Lily's turn to speak again, she rose slowly from her seat, her hands gripping the edge of the table for support. The courtroom seemed quieter now, as if everyone sensed that this moment would define the trajectory of the case. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and turned to face the judge and the prosecutor. "Your Honor," she began, her voice soft but clear, "I understand the importance of following laws. I really do. But I also believe there are times when doing what's right means going beyond rules, especially when someone's life is at stake." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. "This wasn't about me ignoring the law because I felt like it. It was about making a choice between standing by and watching an innocent creature suffer, or stepping up to help." She glanced at the gallery, meeting the eyes of a few people who had been listening intently. Some nodded in encouragement, while others sat frozen, curious to hear what she'd say next. Turning back to the judge, she continued. "The prosecutor mentioned proper channels and waiting for authorities. But let me ask you this. How long should a dying dog have to wait? Minutes? Hours? What if help never came at all?" Her voice grew stronger now, tinged with emotion, but still controlled. "When I saw that dog, it wasn't just hurt, it was terrified. It looked at me like I was its only hope, and maybe I was. Animal control later told me the dog was hours away from death. If I hadn't acted immediately, it wouldn't be alive today." Reaching into her folder, Lily pulled out a set of graphic photographs taken by animal control officers after they arrived on the scene. The images showed the German shepherd lying in a heap of debris, its fur matted with blood, its eyes wide with fear. She held them up briefly before handing them to the bailiff, who passed them along to the judge. "These aren't just pictures," she said firmly, pointing toward the photos. "They're proof of what I walked into that day. Proof of why I couldn't walk away. Would any of you have waited if it were your child trapped instead of a dog? Or your sibling? Your pet?" Her question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. For the first time since the trial began, Judge Calloway's stern expression faltered. He studied the photographs closely, his brow furrowing as he absorbed the details. Even the prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact with the images. Lily seized the moment, pressing forward with quiet determination. "Compassion isn't reckless, Your Honor. It's human. Laws exist to protect us, yes, but they also exist to reflect our values. Shouldn't one of those values be kindness? Shouldn't we reward action over indifference?" The room fell silent, the tension palpable. No one dared to move or speak, afraid to break the spell of Lily's heartfelt plea. For a fleeting second, it felt as though the entire courtroom had forgotten the formalities of the trial and was simply listening to a young girl pour her heart out. Judge Calloway leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. His gaze lingered on Lily, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. Though he quickly masked his reaction with his usual stoic demeanor, something had shifted. The ridicule and condescension that had marked his earlier interactions with her were gone, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. As Lily returned to her seat, her heart racing but her head held high, she knew she had done everything she could. She had laid bare not just her actions but her soul, trusting that the court would see the humanity behind her decision. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. But for now, she allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. Lily's voice softened as she transitioned from recounting the specifics of her case to a broader reflection on morality and justice. She stood tall now, no longer the nervous teenager who had entered the courtroom hours earlier. Instead, she radiated quiet confidence, her words carrying a weight that commanded attention. "Your Honor," she began, addressing Judge Calloway, directly but speaking for everyone in the room, "I know I'm just a high school student. I don't have fancy degrees or years of experience like lawyers do, but I've learned something important in my life. Sometimes doing what's right means breaking the rules." She paused, letting her statement resonate before continuing. "History is full of people who did exactly that. People who chose humanity over laws when those laws didn't align with justice." She glanced at the gallery, making eye contact with a few members of the audience. Some nodded encouragingly, while others sat frozen, captivated by her words. Turning back to the judge, she continued, "Take Rosa Parks, for example. When she refused to give up her seat on that bus, she broke the law. But because of her courage, we live in a better world today." Or think about Edward Snowden. He exposed secrets that challenged authority, risking everything to shine a light on truth. These people weren't perfect, and maybe their methods weren't always ideal, but they acted out of conviction. They acted because staying silent would have meant betraying their values. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly unprepared for this shift in tone. He opened his mouth as if to object, but Lily pressed on before he could interrupt. "What I did wasn't nearly as monumental as what those people did," she admitted humbly, holding up her hands to acknowledge the difference. "But it was still a choice between following the rules and doing what I believed was right. And yes, I broke the law. But I did it to save a life that someone else had abandoned." Her voice grew firmer now, tinged with passion. "If we only ever act within the confines of strict legality, then what happens to compassion? What happens to empathy? Laws are supposed to protect us, but they're also supposed to reflect our humanity. Shouldn't we celebrate action over apathy? Courage over indifference?" The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Even Judge Calloway seemed momentarily taken aback, his usual stern expression giving way to something softer. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps doubt. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the desk as he listened intently. Lily took a deep breath, realizing she had reached the crux of her argument. "I'm not here to say laws don't matter," she clarified, her tone respectful but unwavering. "They absolutely do. But laws are made by humans, and humans aren't perfect. Sometimes the system fails. When that happens, shouldn't we trust people to step up and do what's right, even if it means bending the rules?" As she finished speaking, the courtroom remained eerily quiet. The prosecutor stared down at his notes, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Members of the gallery exchanged glances, some nodding subtly, others whispering behind cupped hands. For the first time, the atmosphere felt less adversarial and more contemplative. Judge Calloway tapped his pen against the desk, his face unreadable. He looked down at the photographs of the injured dog again, then back at Lily. Though he quickly masked his emotions, there was a flicker of something new in his gaze, something resembling respect. Lily returned to her seat, her heart pounding, but her resolve unshaken. She knew she had planted a seed of doubt, not just in the judge's mind, but in the minds of everyone present. Whether it would blossom into a verdict in her favor remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. Her words had struck a chord, and for now that was enough. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath as Judge Calloway announced a brief recess. He rose from his seat, his robes swishing behind him as he disappeared into his chambers. The tension in the room was palpable. No one spoke, no one moved. Even the bailiff stood frozen near the door, his usual stoic demeanor replaced by an air of anticipation. Lily sat quietly at her table, her hands clasped tightly together. She stared down at her notes, though her mind was far away, replaying every word she had spoken and wondering if it had been enough. In the gallery, whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Some people praised Lily's courage, while others debated whether her actions truly justified breaking the law. A woman, seated near the front, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, clearly moved by the emotional testimony. Nearby, a man muttered under his breath, "She's got guts, I'll give her that." Despite the divided opinions, there was one thing everyone agreed on. This case wasn't ordinary. It had struck a nerve, forcing each person in the room to confront their own beliefs about justice, compassion, and the limits of the law. After what felt like an eternity, the judge reemerged from his chambers. His face betrayed nothing as he took his seat, his expression unreadable. The room fell silent again, all eyes fixed on him. For a moment, he simply adjusted his papers, prolonging the suspense. Then, clearing his throat, he spoke. "Miss Harper," he began, his voice steady but lacking its earlier sharpness. "This court acknowledges the unique circumstances surrounding your case. While your decision to trespass cannot be condoned, it is equally undeniable that your intent was rooted in compassion rather than malice." He paused, glancing briefly at the prosecutor, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Turning back to Lily, Judge Calloway continued, "The evidence presented, including the photographs and statements from animal control, confirms the severity of the situation you encountered. Furthermore, your defense raised valid points regarding moral responsibility versus legal obligation." Another pause, longer this time, as if he were carefully choosing his next words. "In light of these considerations," he declared, his tone firm but not unkind, "the charges against you are hereby dismissed." A gasp rippled through the gallery, followed by murmurs of disbelief and relief. Someone clapped instinctively before stopping themselves, aware of the courtroom's formality. Lily's eyes widened in shock, her lips parting slightly as she processed the judge's words. For a moment she simply sat there, stunned, until the reality of the verdict sank in. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back, determined to stay composed. Judge Calloway wasn't finished, however. Leaning forward slightly, he added, "Let this serve as both a lesson and a warning, Miss Harper. Compassion is commendable, but vigilante actions can lead to unintended consequences. In the future, I urge you to seek proper channels whenever possible." His tone softened ever so slightly as he concluded, "That said, I believe your heart was in the right place. Do not lose that quality. It is rare and valuable." As the gavel struck the desk, signaling the end of the trial, the gallery erupted into quiet cheers and applause. People smiled warmly at Lily, some even approaching her afterward to offer congratulations or words of encouragement. One elderly man patted her shoulder and said, "You did good, young lady. Real good." Lily exhaled deeply, feeling as though a massive weight had been lifted off her chest. She gathered her papers slowly, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear this time, but from overwhelming relief. As she left the courtroom accompanied by her family, she couldn't help but glance back at Judge Calloway. Though his face remained impassive, there was a subtle nod in her direction, a small gesture but one that spoke volumes. For Lily, the verdict wasn't just a victory, it was validation. It proved that standing up for what you believe in, even when the odds are stacked against you, can make a difference. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly have challenges, she walked out of that courthouse with her head held high, knowing she had fought not just for herself, but for something greater: justice, kindness, and the power of doing what's right. In the days following the trial, Lily's story began to spread like wildfire. Local newspapers picked up the tale, highlighting her bravery and eloquence in the courtroom. Headlines like "Teenager Triumphs Over Adversity" and "Courage" In the courtroom, dominated front pages, capturing the imagination of readers across the county. Social media platforms buzzed with discussions about her case, with many praising her for standing up not only for herself, but also for the voiceless dog she had saved. The German Shepherd, now named Justice by animal control officers, became a symbol of hope and resilience. After receiving medical treatment, he was adopted by a loving family who vowed to give him the care and affection he deserved. Photos of Justice recovering in his new home circulated online, showing him wagging his tail, playing fetch, and lounging happily on soft blankets. Each image served as a reminder of what Lily had risked and achieved. People commented on posts, thanking her for saving an innocent life and vowing to support similar causes in their own communities. For Lily, life changed in unexpected ways. Strangers approached her at school or in town, shaking her hand and telling her how inspired they were by her courage. Teachers praised her during class, holding her up as an example of determination and integrity. At first, the attention made her uncomfortable. She hadn't acted out of a desire for fame, but over time she came to appreciate the impact her story was having. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about sparking conversations around compassion, justice, and the balance between laws and morality. Encouraged by the support she received, Lily decided to channel her experience into something meaningful. She began volunteering at a local animal shelter, dedicating her weekends to caring for abandoned and injured animals. The staff quickly recognized her passion and work ethic, often asking her to speak at community events about responsible pet ownership and the importance of speaking up when you see wrongdoing. Her speeches resonated deeply with audiences, especially young people, who saw her as proof that even teenagers could make a difference. But perhaps the most profound change occurred within Lily herself. The trial had ignited a spark inside her, a desire to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Inspired by the legal arguments she had encountered in court, she announced to her parents one evening that she wanted to become a lawyer. "I want to help people navigate the system," she explained earnestly. "Not everyone has the tools or confidence to stand up for themselves. I want to be that person someday." Her parents, though initially surprised, were proud of her ambition. They encouraged her to pursue her dreams, reminding her that she had already proven she could overcome incredible challenges. With their support, Lily threw herself into her studies, excelling in subjects like history, English, and government. She joined the debate team at school, honing her public speaking skills and learning how to construct persuasive arguments. Every step felt like preparation for the future she envisioned, a future where she could use her voice to advocate for others. Meanwhile, Judge Calloway found himself reflecting on the trial more than he cared to admit. Though outwardly stern as ever, he privately acknowledged that Lily's defense had reminded him of why he had entered the legal profession in the first place, to serve justice, not merely enforce rules. In rare moments, he allowed himself to wonder if he might have been too harsh in his initial treatment of the teenager. Still, he took solace in knowing that his final decision had honored both the law and the spirit of humanity, a balance he hoped to maintain moving forward. As months turned into years, Lily's journey continued to inspire those around her. What had started as a single act of kindness had blossomed into a legacy of courage and advocacy. And while she remained humble, always crediting Justice, the dog who had unknowingly set everything in motion, there was no denying the ripple effect of her actions. Through determination, empathy, and an unshakable belief in doing what's right, Lily Harper proved that even the smallest voices can create waves of change.